if I may just, touch upon the history of the Kingdom of Bahrain within financial services, the kingdom has long been recognized as a regional financial hub, which dates back to the 1980s. Today, the financial services sector within the kingdom has grown to be the largest contributor to our GDP, surpassing the oil and gas sector. It is also one of the largest employers within the Kingdom of Bahrain. So we believe that it's extremely important to future-proof this critical sector to us in order for it to remain dynamic and competitive. Based on this recognition, we, the Central Bank of Bahrain, proactively pioneered the region's first regulatory sandbox back in 2017. And this was preceded by, again, pioneering the first fintech unit within a regulatory authority in the region during the same year. So to summarize, what inspired us to push for this initiative is really twofold. First of all, our commitment in the Kingdom of Bahrain towards digitalization and innovation as key pillars of sustainable economic growth. And second of all, we recognize and we realize that financial technology, or fintech, it's reshaping the future of financial services. In order for the sector to remain dynamic and competitive, we have to, as regulators, play a proactive role in enabling and fostering innovation and digital transformation within the sector. I think that financial regulators' role has really evolved. In the past, regulators were primarily concerned only with compliance, oversight, and supervising. However, today, we as regulators have a bigger role to play in this fast-evolving digital era. We have a role to enable innovations. We have a role to foster innovations. We have to be very vigilant of the emerging innovative business models. We have a role to play to encourage more collaborations between incumbent financial institutions, between innovators as well. And we have a role to create an enabling regulatory environment, a regulatory framework that balances between fostering innovation without compromising financial stability and financial integrity. And the regulatory sandbox is a great tool. From one end, it helps innovators test their innovative products and solutions in a controlled environment. From another angle, it also supports regulators to understand those innovations and to be able to act fast in upgrading our regulations in a timely manner.
Definitely, very interesting. I remember having implemented Sandbox regulation back in 2017 in Mauritius, and we were one of the first countries in Africa to implement it, but it comes with a lot of challenges. And I moved to Rajesh. In your opinion, with your experience, what are the most pressing regulatory challenges within this sandbox environment? And in your opinion, what collaborative approaches that governments and businesses can adopt to overcome those challenges?
Thank you, Deepak. Really appreciate giving me an opportunity to be here, and then giving you a sense of, from a very technology and then industry point of view, how we look at these regulatory sandboxes, because people don't realize that it plays such an important role. Yasmin, you beautifully articulated the necessity for having these regulatory sandboxes and the role that really it plays in truly balancing out between, because at one end, the innovators and developers of these systems would want to go too far with features and what they could do. At the same time, the regulators on the other end trying to sort of rein in and then making sure that you're not causing any harm. And the balancing these two is going to be a big challenge in all ways. And I think nowadays, I think more and more world governments we see are looking at regulation mostly innovation-led. That means you do not stop innovation, but you want to be innovation-led. At the same time, making sure that there are no bad actors in the system and there aren't unintended consequence that with this regulation that you would cause. But a regulatory sandbox provides a phenomenally good environment, a safe environment for you to test it out and then deploy it or, provide a report and ensure that, this is something which we can do really well. So challenges that you asked me, Deepak, I think the first and foremost challenge I feel is there are multiple regulatory bodies in each of these countries, I would say, trying to do too many things, and may not be the case with Bahrain being a little bit more straightforward. I think you can do that, but I think in a larger countries, I mean, I can tell you from my experience in India, there isn't one regulatory authority who has control over the sandbox, but they would say, oh, I want to do this, and RBI, our central bank would want to do certain things, and our finance ministry want to do a little bit different things, and so we need to make sure that these are aligned in some sense. So that's a big challenge, multiple regulatory bodies. So if you haven't had a regulatory sandbox in your own country, maybe you should think of what is called as a unified sandbox framework, which is beginning to emerge in certain countries, where you bring in these ideas together and ensure that you're not, cross-purpose in many ways. So that's one big challenge, and I believe the solution for that would be interagency collaboration, ensuring that the fiscal body versus the monetary policy, etc. They all come together and ensure that we are not overdoing this or cross-purpose challenges. I mean, UK, for example, has an FCA authority which provides a single window sandbox entry point, which is also, I think, something which we might want to look at it. The second biggest challenge is this whole slow and complex approval process. By the time a startup or somebody wants to get onto the sandbox, you're trying to go through this very laborious approval process, which obviously in any environment we want to make sure that there's an ease of doing business, and this would be a great example where you probably want to make sure that there are fast track approvals possible, public dashboards which are published on a regular basis, and ensuring that there isn't a bit of an issue with this. Singapore's mass sandbox, for example, which I'm sure, Yasmin, you're familiar with this. They do a very good job of making sure that they have a 21 days time limit for them to really get onto their sandbox. So that's a big one. But I will say one more thing and then I'll stop. I think it's important for us to realize how much the AI developments, especially around generative AI and the broadly artificial intelligence as such, has impacted in a positive way and a negative way in terms of everything that we do around a regulatory framework or a sandbox. Reason is, when you look at cybersecurity and cyber threats that you see, frauds that you could commit and so on and so forth, it is phenomenally important for us to ensure that both security for AI systems as well as artificial intelligence-induced cybersecurity. These are two different things, but they kind of act in tandem, making sure that we have a very, very strong understanding and a control over what we can put on these sandboxes and how we can really test it out, and then ensure that we do not cause any harm to the general public. And last but not the least, we also, I think somebody mentioned, I think in the original discussion, that these are, while you can think of it as a country-based sandbox and what we do, let's not forget that the world, AI, I think you mentioned it, Judge, I think you said these are not silos anymore. I mean, you got to think of this as a very international collaboration. You got to think of this as an inter-country, interdependent ways of doing things. While you might want to test it out within the country framework, but I think there's a lot more happening internationally, inter-country collaborations. Most of the systems, you look at SWIFT and all of that Yasmin will know a lot more than I do. I think these systems will have dependency on what we do outside of the organization, outside of the countries with international law.
Definitely very interesting, especially when we have experience and share knowledge within countries. And you mentioned about AI and research, which is very important indeed. And talking about AI and research, I would ask Dr. Najwa, especially you are very into the research and into advanced technology. So how do you think, in your opinion, that the regulatory sandbox move from an experimental phase, to permanent laws that would eventually help and eventually incite countries to move ahead, and that would support economic growth for the future?
First, Your Excellency, I would like to thank you for having me here. I would like to thank the World Government Summit for having me here. This is a very pertinent question, and I like the flow of, moving from the moving into the technological aspect. I think one of the main challenges that regulatory sandbox have today is finding their way into a meaningful regulatory framework or a meaningful governance framework. And this governance framework, if we think about it, it has to close a loop in a way that regulations don't become an obstacle for technological advancements nor for technological deployments and adoption. And a closed loop, an example of a closed loop would be to have an overarching law. Based on this law, we have executive regulations and policy frameworks. And regulations and frameworks eventually with time can be adapted to technological advancements, especially as we start talking about technological deployment in specific sectors and adapted to sectorial priorities. So the way to get there is, one, we have to acknowledge that regulatory sandboxes, they do provide invaluable insights from a technology trial perspective, from a technology adoption perspective, and they are a very good segue to understand the benefit and the limitations of technologies when adopted to a specific use case. And at that point, policymakers, they have to work very closely with technologists and researchers and scientists and the people that work within these regulatory frameworks to basically understand, analyze, and put these as valuable lessons that will make it into compliance, governance, and regulatory frameworks. Today, what is happening is regulations are coming as an afterthought. So you have immense, and we see this with generative AI, we have a very big technological advancement, and usually those happen fast. And then you see regulatory frameworks that come in order to regulate adoption, especially considering things like ethics, like security, etc. And you see some of them are getting either too restrictive or basically they're getting too permissive. And the lesson learned from that is that regulatory frameworks cannot only be done by policymakers. They are actually a public-private partnership at the end of the day, right? So you do need the insights of technologists, you need the insight of the industry, of technology players to go into there to understand how to shape these regulations, how to understand their impact on sectors and sectorial priorities, and then how to put the compliance and the governance around them. So maybe allow me now to take a segue into why UAE can be considered as a case study. From my perspective, I think the UAE is a very good benchmark on how governance frameworks have been put in tandem with the technological advancements that is happening worldwide, but also that is being driven from the country itself. I think we've seen in the UAE, and I will only talk about the ones that us as an institute have been involved in. So we've seen a lot of regulatory sandboxes and basically trials that have directly influenced permanent laws and the corresponding regulations and policies around them. I can state the governance framework around cybersecurity and encryption. I can state the one on AI, and these actually have already been done and have been completed and of course always being worked on. And I can state the new regulatory trials or sandboxes that are happening around quantum and autonomous technologies. So if we think about what's happening on cybersecurity and encryption, this is a sector that the UAE historically has been very well known for. And now let's say sovereign technologies are making it into systems, are making it into solutions that are being deployed. And there was a law that has been launched last year, and this has been led by the Cybersecurity Council and also driven by input by institutes like the Technology Innovation Institute. So a law made it, then there have been executive regulations that have been worked on, and these executive regulations, they took direct input from national bodies that worked on the development of those cryptographic algorithms, solutions, etc., as well as international bodies like the NIST and the likes, right? And now you have clear guidelines on what needs to be adopted, how do you become compliant, and basically have your infrastructure ready for that. The same applies for AI, where now you have a clear framework for AI in the UAE, where you have clear guidelines on ethics, on security, cross-border compliance that Rajesh mentioned before, and this is what allows the adopters of AI to understand the risk, to understand what they have to be compliant with, etc. And we see other sandboxes that are being done on quantum technologies, on autonomous technologies, and the aim of that is to feed the regulators or governance bodies, which I think here they are formed in time, in tandem with the time that these sandboxes are being trialed out, and then eventually they will make it into these laws, regulations, and policies.
Thank you for your insight. And as we noticed that in all our discussion, AI comes very often, and here let me come directly. We have some 5 minutes left. You know, the conversation goes on very interestingly, so we try to share those 5 minutes with everybody. So in this increasing era of AI, Yasmin, do you foresee that AI could potentially replace regulatory sandbox, or you think that sandbox will remain indispensable in, for example, balancing innovation with the legislative concept?
Before I answer this question, I just wanted to quickly touch upon what was shared by the esteemed panelists, Rajesh and Dr. Najwa. Just going back to your previous question on the biggest challenges when it comes to sandboxes, and I completely agree with what was said with my colleagues. As regulators, I think one of the biggest challenges that we face when it comes to regulatory sandboxes is how do we balance between regulating and fostering innovation? That remains a challenge that regulators face on a day-by-day basis. Maybe like in Bahrain, we have the advantage of having a single regulatory authority overseeing the whole financial services sector, unlike other jurisdictions. However, this challenge still remains, and I think it's a challenge that is faced by other regulators as well. Another challenge may be understanding how specific technologies that are evolving, for instance, quantum technologies, AI, how are these going to impact financial services? As financial regulators, we need to understand the business models, the use cases, the risks that are associated with those technologies to enable us to put in place enabling and conducive regulations. Now, going back to your question on AI and whether AI is going to replace regulatory sandboxes, I definitely do not feel that will happen. Yes, I think that AI will play a bigger role in regulatory processes in the future, whether it's in supporting and compliance checks and oversights and predicting risks, analyzing risks. However, it will not replace sandboxes. Why? Because sandboxes solve for two crucial issues. Number one, sandboxes offer live market testing to accelerate innovation. Second of all, they provide regulatory agility. If we speak about the live testing aspect, the sandbox offers innovators the chance to test out their solutions in a safe environment, in a live, safe environment directly with real volunteer customers without being burdened with full regulatory compliance requirements, so at lower operational and lower regulatory costs as well. This enables those innovators to get a perception of market demand, of consumer behavior. It also enables them to have an open dialogue with the regulators to get more regulatory clarity. So the human element there is very essential, and AI cannot replace that. From another perspective, sandboxes help to support with regulatory clarity. Again, they help to refine regulations going forward. They are a bridge between regulators and innovators. The human aspect, ethical judgment, the nuanced decision making are all very important aspects in designing regulatory policies. And that is something that AI cannot do, despite its important role in supporting. What I think can happen is that AI will definitely help to elevate regulatory sandboxes by helping in understanding the risks, maybe simulating real market environments, but they cannot replace regulatory sandboxes.
Thank you. Very quickly, Rajesh, unfortunately we are time out, so I give you a minute. As a president of NASSCOM, can you share probably a notable success story that you've seen that demonstrate the impact of regulatory sandbox?
No, I just totally, definitely. I think there'll be. I also wanted to follow up on what Yasmin was saying. I think while I agree most of what you said, Yasmin, but I think there will be a big impact because of artificial intelligence on the way the regulatory sandboxes of the future. I mean, in the short run, I don't think there'll be much change, as you know, that it'll make it more efficient. But in the longer run, if you take a 5-year window and then you look at this, at the end of the day, sandboxes are nothing but safe testing zones, which means that testing will go through so much of change because of the simulated environment that you're going to create, because of the interfaces that you're going to create. You're going to have a very, very different environment that you're going to create because of the AI, and especially generative AI. So which will mean that the way we look at sandbox will differ significantly. And remember, there is, AI has created a lot of good things, but they also had things like bias detection. If you want to create bias detection within a sandbox, you got to use AI to actually do it in many ways, right? AI might create the bias detection, but AI will also help you to find out where the bias is going to be. Same thing with the explainability. I mean, we have no idea some of these answers, where they're coming from, how they've actually been done. So explainability, another thing, which again, to your other question, Deepak, I think NASSCOM works on some of these aspects of, how do you make sure that there's a responsible AI broadly, which is built into these sandboxes around bias detection, explainability, ethically valid answers and implementation that we could create. Big deal in many of the financial fintech especially is around credit scoring, for example. How do you make sure that these eventually there will be less and less human intervention in credit scoring and in making sure that people are what they are, and how do you evaluate them, and that happens through AI. And how do you make sure that that is done in a very justful manner as opposed to biases that we've already included in some of the systems? So how do you make sure that that is done? So these are all the impacts I believe that which we as a industry body try to get the organizations to do that in the sandbox.
Definitely, thank you.
Thank you.
And the last question to Dr. Najwa, with your multiple experience, having worked in multiple regions and your experience, how do regulatory sandbox contribute to UAE's vision of becoming a global leader in advanced technology and autonomous system?
Very, very quickly, I think the UAE's approach to sandboxes and trial is not really sector-specific or use case-specific. It's a national strategy. Today, through the frameworks that have been put for AI, for cybersecurity, for the sandboxes that are being put together for technologies like quantum, autonomous systems, etc., I do believe that the UAE is assuring itself as a global leader in there. And if you see within these frameworks, the aspects of inclusivity, of sustainability, etc., are open there, are always there. And also from a tech perspective, you see more and more also open source contributions are out there in order to ensure that the digital divide is actually being closed. You have, as I mentioned, the frameworks that have been published. You have other initiatives that the Reg Lab, for example, that are being put together for technology trials and also understanding the regulatory implications for autonomous systems adoption, etc. And with these initiatives, the country is ensuring itself or positioning itself as a global leader, both from a technology development perspective as well as a regulatory compliance and governance perspective.
Definitely. So here we are, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, a very interesting topic. The time goes on very fast. Please join me to thank and give a big round of applause to our speakers for this session. Thank you very much.